The Oklahoma City Thunder had one of the more crazy off seasons of any team in the league. They made by far the most trades. They acquired so many picks, and they are set up for the future in a very interesting way. And I think they can go about their future in multiple different ways. So obviously they traded Chris Paul. They acquired guys like Rubio, Oubre, who then they flipped them for even more picks. They traded Steven Adams. They lost Gallinari, and this team is nowhere near the caliber that it was last year. The problem with the Thunder, though, yes, they have all these picks, but they have to be careful to play this right, because when you have all these picks, there are multiple ways you can go about your future. I see it as you can go like the Celtics route, where when Danny Ainge acquired all those picks, he kept them and he drafted with them. And he drafted Marcus Smart, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown. He hit on those picks and he's built his core. And now he makes win-now moves. The problem with that is, with the Thunder, you could be scared that a lot of your picks turn into late first-rounders and then you don't get the player you ever wanted. You could also end up in a problem kind of like the Celtics where you just have too many. Where instead of making trades with them, you're just content with keeping them. And you end up drafting like 3 late picks a year, and a lot of those players turn out to be not so good, and you hope the Thunder wouldn't turn into one of those teams. The Thunder could also, pretty shortly, just make win-now moves. Like, who's to say the Thunder don't use all these picks to trade for stars? I'm not saying this year, maybe not even next year, but if Shea continues to get better and Bazley continues to progress and you can draft somebody good, the Thunder are in a better position than really anybody to trade for a star, and they could be right back in winning contention. Like, is it crazy to think that the Thunder could try to give the Rockets their own picks back for some of their stars? Or maybe to the Clippers, their own picks? Because Sam Presti has fleeced some teams for their picks and give them players that aren't as good really as the players they've gotten in return. And that's just how good the Thunder have managed this offseason. Obviously, we don't know which stars will come available in the next year or two, but just going off of what we know now, there's a big possibility that if the Thunder wanted to make a move at a star, they have the pieces to do it. Now, if you wanted to draft, next year's draft, we don't know what the draft class is going to look like, obviously. I mean, the college season, has barely started. They literally just did this draft. But as of right now, Cade Cunningham seems like the guy, and it already looks like next year's draft will be more of the traditional draft class, with a consensus top couple picks, instead of this just I don't really know who to draft. He could go number 1, he could go number 5. It's not like this year, so maybe that's who the Thunder want to target next year. And the thing is, the Thunder, even if they do fall into late first rounds, they have the ability to trade up with all these picks. So, if they do end up with 20s picks, they're going to have their pick, which will be pretty high, and you package that with some of your other ones, and they could easily move into top 3 if they're not already in top 3. The Thunder, if they want to be players in free agency, could open up money, because they traded some of their big contracts, like a Chris Paul. If you look at their payroll, the only really big contract on the team right now is Al Horford, making $27 million for the next however many years, which that is a bad contract. But who's to say the Thunder can't inevitably flip him like they did with Chris Paul? I mean, Chris Paul was seen to have negative value because of his contract, and they turned him into a boatload of picks. Now, I don't think Al Horford's going to have Chris Paul value, but if he comes out and plays well, maybe they could turn him into another pick and get off that money. Even if they don't get off that money, there's no other really big contracts on the table. You have George Hill's $10 million, Trevor Ariza's $12.8, and then you just kind of have a bunch of small contracts because Shea still hasn't been paid, Lou Dort's making bare nothing, so they have the ability to be players in free agency. The problem is I don't exactly know how the Thunder would get anyone. It's not like Oklahoma City's this big market that's going to attract a bunch of free agents. And right now, it's not like the Thunder have a lot of, talented and promising young players that players would be attracted to. Obviously they have Shea, but you would need to expect Shea to take a massive jump if you wanted a free agent to come there. But even if they don't get a free agent, playing through the draft could play to the Thunder's advantage, because when you have this many picks, it almost seems impossible to not hit on a few. Like, you're not going to hit on all of them. They're not all going to be good picks. But if you were to draft with all 19, I feel like you're pretty much guaranteed to get at least a couple really good players. Like I said, I compare it to the Celtics, drafting Smart, Brown, and Tatum, and then acquiring role players like Neesmith this year and Grant Williams with some of their other picks. And then they used some of those other picks, like like the Nets pick, to give to the Cavs to acquire Kyrie. Kyrie's trade obviously did not work, so you hope the Thunder don't do anything like that, but that's just an example of how they can play their future. Or, like I said, maybe next year or the year after, they go all in and trade these picks for good players, and all of a sudden they're back in contention. The Thunder have so many ways they can go about their future for the next however many years until 2027, and they are set up to do so many things for a long time. I don't know what the Thunder will do, but I think either way, the Thunder are in great position to be one of the better teams for years to come. Now, all that I'm saying is assuming the Thunder will be bad next year. But what are the chances that they're not bad next year? Now, obviously this roster, when you look at it, doesn't seem amazing. But we've seen crazier things happen, and if this team can play together, I don't see it being that crazy that this team could make a shot at the playoffs. Shea is very good. He's young. Once again, could take a jump. Baisley, Dort could take a jump. But then you have guys like Al Horford. Al Horford, I still think, is a really good player. I think the fit in Philly was just terrible for him. If he can go back to being his old self, or maybe not fully to his old self, but at least be better than he was, he could provide some much-needed big help for them. You still have guys like George Hill who are solid NBA players. You have a big wild card in Pokusevski. Like, it's not crazy to think this team could make a run at the playoffs. I mean, they overachieved last year. Everyone's seen a picture of them having a 0.2% chance to make the playoffs, and they did, and they took the Rockets to 7 games. So I think there is a chance that they could overachieve, and they could be a team that is in the playoffs and still drafting high in the lottery, like the Celtics. I'm not saying they're going to be like the Celtics, because the Celtics had a year where they made the Eastern Conference Finals and then got the number 1 overall pick, which then they used to trade and get Tatum. I don't think they'll be that good. However, you could see them being a team to make the playoffs as a low seed, lose in the first round, and then draft in the lottery still with maybe multiple picks. Or if they're good next year, maybe they say, hey, since we're already good, let's acquire some good players and let's make a run at being a good team again. And instead of being a rebuild, trading all your good players was more of a retooling of good players. So the Thunder have many different ways to go about their future for the next however many years, and the Thunder are set up to be great.